Jasper Collins was not the kind of man people noticed, and he preferred it that way. Living a life of quiet rhythm and simple joys, Jasper had long embraced the solitude that came with his modest, unassuming nature. Every morning before dawn, the old wooden floors of his humble house creaked beneath his feet as he padded to the kitchen. There, he brewed a pot of strong coffee, its rich aroma filling the air as the first light of day seeped through the windows. This small routine had a grounding effect on Jasper, a gentle reminder of the peace that filled his home and his heart. The house itself stood on the outskirts of town, not much to look at by any measure. The paint was peeling, the roof leaked on particularly stormy nights, and the garden was overrun with wildflowers and tangled ivy. Yet to Jasper, every weathered corner, every bit of cracked paint, and even the unruly garden held memories, echoes of a life he had shared with his late wife, Lillian. It was in this very home that they had raised their children, now grown and scattered across the country, living lives full and rich in their own right. But it was here that he and Lillian had loved deeply, laughed wholeheartedly, and endured life's hardships with grace and patience. Even after Lillian had passed, her laughter still seemed to echo in the rooms, her presence a comforting reminder of the love they had shared. Jasper found solace in the familiar. The house, despite its flaws, was a physical testament to a life he cherished, a place where love had been the foundation of every wall and window. Jasper was a man who kept to himself, not because he disliked people, but because he didn't feel the need to impose. Life, he had learned, had a way of moving forward with or without him, and that, to Jasper, was perfectly fine. He spent his days working at the local hardware store, a small but steady job that brought him a quiet sense of pride. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and Jasper took great care in what he did. Every day he stocked shelves, assisted customers, and occasionally offered advice to those who needed a bit of guidance with their projects. The younger employees often turned to him with questions, drawn to the wisdom in his calm, thoughtful manner and the hands hardened by years of labor. In the evenings, Jasper would take the long way home, walking through the quiet streets of his neighborhood. The habit wasn't intentional at first, just something he'd grown used to over the years. As the golden glow of the setting sun cast a warm light over the houses and trees, Jasper would let his thoughts wander. He'd think about his children, picturing them laughing and thriving in their own corners of the world. He'd remember Lillian, imagining her standing beside him, her hand in his, as they shared the peace of these quiet walks. He'd reflect on how life, though difficult at times, had been good to him, blessing him in quiet, unassuming ways. But on this particular evening, something felt different. The air was thick with a heaviness he couldn't place, the sounds of the neighborhood oddly muted, as if the world were holding its breath. As he turned the corner onto Pine Street, Jasper's steps slowed. Up ahead, near the old church, he saw a car swerve, its tires screeching against the pavement. Time seemed to slow as the vehicle veered off the road, colliding with a lamppost in a sickening crash. For a moment, Jasper stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. But then, as if by instinct, he broke into a run. His heart pounded in his chest as he raced toward the wreckage, his breath catching with a mix of fear and urgency. The car's engine sputtered and hissed, smoke billowing from under the hood. Through the cracked windshield, he could see the driver, a small, elderly woman, her face pale and drawn with pain. Without a second thought, Jasper reached for the car door. It was jammed, but he refused to give up. His rough hands, calloused from years of work, gripped the handle, and with all his strength, he pulled. The metal groaned in protest, but didn't budge. Panic surged within him, but he forced it down, knowing he had to remain calm. He had to get her out. "Hold on, ma'am," Jasper said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "I'm going to get you out of here." The woman's eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused and clouded with fear. She muttered something he couldn't quite catch, her voice a faint whisper, but her eyes spoke volumes. She was terrified, desperate for help. Jasper tried the door again, this time putting his full weight into it. With a loud crack, the door finally gave way, swinging open just enough for him to reach inside. Carefully, he unbuckled her seatbelt, lifting her gently from the car. She was light, her frail body barely more than skin and bones. As he carried her away from the wreckage, he could hear the distant wail of sirens, signaling that help was on the way. But he knew they needed to move faster. He placed her in the back seat of his own car, which he had parked a few feet away, and hurried to the driver's seat, the engine sputtering to life as he began the drive to the hospital. Glancing into the rearview mirror, Jasper watched her shallow breaths, her face pale but calm. She managed to whisper her name. Eleanor Weston. And explained in broken sentences that she had taken a wrong turn, gotten confused, and was so sorry for the trouble. Jasper's heart softened, and in a reassuring tone he replied, "No trouble at all, Miss Eleanor. Just sit tight. We're almost there." At the hospital, nurses rushed to take Eleanor into the emergency room, but Jasper stayed behind. He couldn't leave, not until he knew she was all right. Hours ticked by, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling his lungs as he sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped, his head bowed in a silent prayer. Eventually, a doctor approached him, his face kind but weary. Jasper felt a wave of relief wash over him as the doctor said, "She's going to be all right, thanks to you." Jasper nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. Once he was sure Eleanor was in capable hands, he slipped out of the hospital and made his way home. The streets were empty by then, the night air cool against his skin as he walked, his mind reeling from the day's events. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He had simply done what he hoped someone would do for him, or for Lillian if the situation were reversed. The next morning, the world carried on as usual. The sun rose, the birds sang, and Jasper prepared for another day at the hardware store. But just as he was about to leave, he heard a knock at the door. Visitors were rare in Jasper's life, and he felt a small flicker of surprise as he opened the door to find a man standing on his porch. The man, Daniel Weston, introduced himself with a quiet, steady voice. He was Eleanor's son, a man with a polished professional look, his suit crisp, his shoes gleaming. But it was his eyes that struck Jasper most. They were filled with gratitude and something else, a deeper unspoken emotion. Daniel explained that he had come to thank Jasper personally for saving his mother's life. Jasper, who had never been one for praise, shifted awkwardly, accepting Daniel's thanks with a quiet humility. But Daniel wasn't finished. He recounted how his mother had spoken of Jasper as her guardian angel. As he spoke, he reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope that he handed to Jasper. Hesitant, Jasper took it, his eyes widening when he saw the check inside, a sum that far exceeded anything he had ever imagined. Daniel explained that he wanted to repay Jasper, not just for saving his mother, but for the kindness he had shown her in her moment of need. Jasper's first instinct was to refuse. It didn't feel right to accept money for something he felt anyone would have done. But as he looked into Daniel's eyes, he saw the sincerity there, the genuine gratitude that couldn't be dismissed. With a deep breath, he accepted the check, the weight of it feeling surreal, almost like holding a piece of someone else's life. In the days that followed, Jasper's life began to change. The money allowed him to repair his roof, repaint his house, and bring his garden back to life. His once-worn home now stood refreshed, a symbol of renewal. But the changes went beyond the physical. Neighbors who had once passed by with a polite nod began to stop and chat, drawn to the warmth that seemed to radiate from Jasper and his newfound joy. Eleanor, now recovered, became a true friend to Jasper. She often invited him over for tea, where they would sit together, sharing stories of their lives. For Jasper, these visits were a source of comfort, filling the emptiness left by Lillian's absence. In Eleanor, he found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the quiet pain of loss, but also the subtle joy of living. As time passed, Jasper began to give back to his community. He donated to local charities, helped neighbors in need, and offered his time to those who were struggling, just as he once had. He sought no recognition, yet word of his kindness spread. People came to see Jasper, not just as a quiet man who kept to himself, but as someone who cared deeply, someone who had touched their lives in ways he might never fully understand. The connections he made enriched his life in ways he had never anticipated. His simple act of kindness had set off a chain reaction that changed not only his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. Jasper's story reminded people that, in a world that could feel cold and indifferent, there was still room for warmth, compassion, and hope. As the days turned into months, Jasper continued his walks, but now with a sense of purpose. He knew that his journey wasn't over, that there were still lives to touch, stories to write, and people to help. And as he stood on his porch watching yet another sunset, he felt a quiet gratitude for the people who had entered his life, for the love he had shared, and for the new family he had found. In the end, Jasper realized that life is a journey best shared, and with each act of kindness, he discovered that even the simplest of gestures could change the world, one small moment at a time. In a world that often felt vast and disconnected, Jasper's story was a testament to the power of compassion and kindness. His journey had become a reminder that everyone, no matter how quiet or unassuming, had the ability to make a difference, to light the way for others in need. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jasper closed his eyes, taking in the beauty of that simple, peaceful moment. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the blessings he had received, but for the strength to offer the same to others. He knew his story was far from over, that there were still people to meet, lives to touch, and love to give. With a soft smile, he opened his eyes to the vast world before him, ready to embrace whatever came next. In the quiet of that evening, Jasper had found not just hope, but a legacy, a life rich in love, connection, and purpose. And as he turned to go back inside, he felt a deep, unshakable peace, knowing that he had made a difference in the world simply by being himself.